Genesis 18 begins with Abraham receiving 3 visitors. Some believe they were 3 angels. Some believe they represented the Trinity. And others believe it was 2 angels and the Lord himself in human form.
And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself toward the ground, and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort ye your hearts. After that ye shall pass on, for therefore are ye come to your servant. And they said, So do, as thou hast said. And Abraham hastened into the tent unto Sarah, and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. And Abraham ran unto the herd, and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto a young man, and he hasted to dress it. Then he took butter and milk, and the calf which he had dressed, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat.
The Lord again told Abraham that Sarah would give birth to a son the following year. Sarah was listening from the tent, and she laughed silently. A woman my age have a baby? She scoffed to herself. And with a husband as old as mine?
And Jehovah said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of a surety bear a child who am old? Is anything too hard for Jehovah? At the set time I will return unto thee, when the season cometh round, and Sarah shall have a son. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not, for she was afraid. And he said, Nay, but thou didst laugh. And the men rose up from thence, and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way.
The Lord told Abraham, I have heard that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah are utterly evil, and that everything they do is wicked. I'm going to see if these reports are true or not. Then I will know. The Bible then says that 2 of them went on to Sodom, but the Lord remained with Abraham for a while. The Lord is omnipresent. He knows everything about everything. Why would he need to send some scouts in to find out what was up in Sodom? This was the Lord's way of telling Abraham that Sodom and Gomorrah were doomed. Then Abraham said to the Lord, Will you kill good and bad alike? Suppose you find 50 godly people in the city. Will you destroy it and not spare it for their sakes? That wouldn't be right. Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, to kill the godly and the wicked together. God told Abraham, If I find 50 godly people there, I will spare the entire city for their sake. Then Abraham spoke again. Since I have begun, let me go on. Let me go on and speak further to the Lord, though I am but dust and ashes. Suppose there are 45. Will you destroy the city for lack of 5? And God said, I will not destroy it if there are 45. Abraham kept dropping the number until he came to 10, and the Lord said he would spare the city if he found 10 godly people. Abraham showed compassion for the residents of this wicked place, and was certainly worried about the fate of his nephew. But even 10 godly people could not be found there. the two angels appeared in Sodom at the city gate, where Lot happened to be hanging around.
And there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. And he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet. And ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house. And he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat.
Lot was being a good host to his visitors, but after the meal, as they were preparing to retire for the night, a group of Sodomites surrounded the house. They shouted to Lot, Bring out those men to us so we can force ourselves upon them. That's how wicked Sodom was, and an example of the type of neighbors Lot chose to live amongst. Lot stepped out to talk to them, shutting the door behind him. Please, fellows, he begged, don't do such a wicked thing. Look, I have 2 virgin daughters, and I'll surrender them to you to do with as you wish. But leave these men alone, for they are under my protection. It is one of the Bible's most shocking moments. A man offering up his young daughters to some aggressive degenerates. But one can hope that Lot had some kind of plan in mind at the time, knowing that the men weren't interested in women. But Lot had no time to put a plan into action. The Sodomites lunged at him and began breaking down the door.
But the men put forth their hand and brought Lot into the house to them, and shut the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides, son-in-law, and thy sons and thy daughters, and whomsoever thou hast in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxed great before Jehovah, and Jehovah hath sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, who married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for Jehovah will destroy the city. But he seemed unto his sons-in-law as one that mocked.
In other words, they thought Lot had lost his senses. When I first read this passage, I didn't see the contradiction, but later it hit me. How could Lot have virgin daughters who were married? Some believe Lot had other daughters besides the 2 he offered up to the Sodomites. And others believe the daughters were formally engaged to be married, but had not yet slept with their husbands. When Lot still hesitated, the angels seized his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters, and rushed them to safety outside the city, for the Lord was merciful. Flee for your lives, the angels told him, and don't look back. Escape to the mountains. Don't stay here on the plain, or you will die. Lot was afraid to go into the mountains, and asked if they could flee to a nearby village instead. You'd think, in the midst of all this chaos, that Lot would just be grateful to be alive and obey the order. Instead, he wanted to rearrange the plans of the angels of the Almighty God. For whatever reason, the angels agreed, but told them to hurry. The sun was rising as they reached the village, which was called Zoar.
Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt.
The fate of Lot's wife is one of the Bible's most famous moments. She became a symbol of the rebellious unbeliever, with more of an interest in the things of this world than in the things of God. About 2,000 years later, Jesus told his disciples, "Remember Lot's wife. If you cling to your life, you will lose it, and if you let your life go, you will save it." And so this unnamed woman would forever be remembered as the only human being in history to turn into a pillar of salt.
And Abraham gat up early in the morning to the place where he had stood before Jehovah. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain. And beheld, and lo, the smoke of the land went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt.
So Lot avoided disaster once again. At a company, if you're the boss's nephew, you're going to get some special privileges that the average employee does not get. But nobody benefited more by being the nephew of an important man than Lot. He had escaped being a hostage to Sodom's enemies, and now from perishing in the annihilation of the two most legendary evil cities in history. Lot had feared going into the mountains and thought he'd find safety in the village. But now he became fearful of the people there and took his 2 daughters to live in a cave in the mountains. The daughters feared they would not find husbands or have children. Perhaps God had wiped out the earth, and a new civilization would have to start with them. And what do you do when you fear a childless life? You get your father drunk and get pregnant from him. They slept with Lot on consecutive nights, and both became pregnant with sons. The eldest daughter named her son Moab, and the younger daughter named her son Ammon. Like Sarah's plan to have a son through Hagar, Lot's daughter's plan to have sons by their father went completely outside of the will of God and would carry consequences for years to come. The 2 boys became the nations of Moab and Ammon, bitter enemies of God's chosen people. Roughly 2,000 years later, in his letter to the churches in Asia Minor, the Apostle Peter wrote that Lot was a righteous man, and tormented by the lawless deeds he saw and heard in Sodom. This has puzzled people for centuries. Lot, a righteous man, after such an unflattering portrait in the book of Genesis? But the Apostle Peter wouldn't have written this for no good reason. Despite all his flaws, Lot had faith in God and was appalled by the conduct of his pagan city neighbors, but not enough to leave on his own accord.